Our next guest, so basically, let me just, in case people got on the show earlier, I played, basically there was where is it? The two ULEZ ones, which seemingly, weirdly, the negative story for the ULEZ person that's been reported. I've not seen actually the one of this, but this is the story yesterday in court of this. So let's just play this, and then we'll get on our guest then, who will explain further.
A big thank you, first of all, to Heather. What a brilliant victory today we had. The person that ran over Heather in Buckhurst Lane, I hope I got that, Buckhurst Road, was found guilty. And in terms of the court, they said not only was Heather's evidence credible, but it was compelling in terms of the guilty verdict. So now TfL come clean and actually sort out some compensation for Heather, who was out of work for six weeks because of one of your operatives, who was acting basically out of all control possible. Not only that, we found out today that they already had 6 penalty points on his licence. So we'll look forward to the sentencing hearing, where Heather will be putting forward a victim impact statement to express her concern that he's out and about on the roads. He's still driving today as a menace, and that is disgraceful. So TfL, pay up, sort out Heather. And also, we've got Claire here, who was going to be a witness. Sadly, because he didn't turn up, we only had a foreshortened trial. But all I can say is Claire has fantastic evidence to offer about a 6-mile chase to try and stop the guy getting away. He not only hit Heather and ran away, but he tried to flee the scene, and for 6 miles he was hoping to escape onto the M25 and get out of the area completely. But thanks, it has to be said, to Claire for stopping him in his tracks. What a fantastic job that she did, and I'm really sorry that Heather's had to go through all this, for all the pain and agony that she still feels to this day from this idiot, and that's what he is, an idiot who's been going around driving as a menace on our roads. Thank you very much.
So that was, obviously there's just the next bit there with Claire there, but this is our guest counsellor, I believe Conservative counsellor, Simon. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Sean. I'm good, thank you very much. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. I was obviously, we've met before. I don't know if you remember me. I've got various ULEZ protests.
You've got one of those faces for crime watchers, I say.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And
as have I, by the way, as have I.
But I was just going to say, it's quite strange, really, because I can't find any news stories about this case. But I can find news cases about the other ULEZ-related story about the chap who was basically given a suspended sentence because he was using his flat as a hub, essentially, for what seems like Blade Runner sort of activity, but there's no stories about this. So why is that? What's going on? What's happened?
Mainstream media for you, isn't it, really? They are only interested in their narrative, their story, and sadly, for many people, they have to get their news, the real news, through Twitter or through some other online method, because frankly, the mainstream is just such letting people down these days, which is a great shame. It's not through want of trying. I even had the dreaded BBC contact me about it, but they didn't turn up. So, all you can say is not through want of trying on our part to try and get that story out there. So thank you for picking it up, is what I must say, and for covering this type of story. It's absolutely brilliant.
So, but just before we go into this, do you just want to briefly introduce yourself,
Yes,
Simon?
I'm Simon Fawthrop. I'm a counsellor in Bromley, and as you know, Bromley is probably the most anti-ULEZ place in the whole of London, really. Residents to this day, you probably don't know this, but residents to this day are still fighting it. And again, that's not in the mainstream media. Every single day, there are residents across Bromley, and actually the whole of outer London, to be fair, who when they hear about a camera being put up, because if ULEZ was so successful, why is Khan determined to put up yet more cameras, yet more infrastructure? It's such a rip-roaring success, isn't it? So he has to then apply to put up a camera and get a license effectively to do it, a permit, a license, whatever you want to call it. And when he does that, he has to publish it. The permit has to be published. So these residents, being very savvy, have cottoned onto it. They look for when the permit's been issued, when they're going to come, and when these people come along to try and install a ULEZ camera, well, lo and behold, they're confronted by some residents who are just standing there protesting. Of course, they have no right to move them out of the way. So inevitably, these extra cameras disappear, and they've not installed on that particular day. But then they'll apply to do it on another day and another day. So all of these people going across Bromley, Bexley, generally out of London, doing this fantastic work. It's absolutely amazing. So, yeah, that's just to give you a flavour of how reviled I think ULEZ is in parts of outer London, because particularly in the rural areas where you've got people possibly with less money than you might have, in some of the more central areas where there's no public transport, they rely on their cars. And just to give you an example, my next door neighbour, but one, she was having physiotherapy every single week, and it was costing her £12.50. An old lady, pensioner, etc., and she was being charged £12.50 a day. So every time she went to that appointment. And this is the sort of thing that we're confronting, which is why it's so reviled and hated around here. I mean, and she couldn't get any money off the scrappage scheme. Eventually she had to get rid of her car and get something else. But but of course now she's even more penniless than she was before. So, that's the sort of thing that's been happening time after time, and it's still continuing. And as I say, if you go to somewhere like Biggin Hill, basically Biggin Hill is a ULEZ-free zone, because the residents there are determined to keep it free, and they do. Any time there's a permit, they're there blocking it. So anyway, let's put it in context. But way back in this time last year, what you actually had was, because Khan hadn't rolled out his camera network, he'd hired these ULEZ vans with cameras on them, camera vans, to go round and snoop on people and try and catch people out and hide around corners to see if they could get, a number plate and charge someone £12.50. But again, these fantastic people, because they are not breaking any laws, they'd get a placard and they'd hold the placard in front of the camera. So therefore, effectively, the van became worthless. It was absolutely worthless, and that's how this incident started. Because on that particular occasion, there was a group of residents blocking a van, and eventually the van went away. But with the van comes another car full of security guards, because apparently, these are all thugs. These pensioners are all thugs about to go and riot and do whatever else it is. So lo and behold, on this particular occasion, the van disappeared, but the security car behind it then sort of came forward and actually deliberately ran into Heather, who you saw briefly on that film there. Mm-hmm. And this was just in front of the guy. She's probably about a meter and a half, 2 meters away from the car, and it ran into her. She collapsed onto the bonnet with her.
Is there any footage of that, Simon? Is there any?
There is somewhere. I will see if I can get it sent to you at some stage, because you might be interested in that. Yes, it's out there in social media land somewhere. So I can see if I can get that sent to you. But
yeah, I'm just going to have a look for it whilst you're speaking.
Interestingly, and then, having sort of knocked her, she then tried to get away and move to the side. And as she was going to the side, the car zoomed off and hit her again. So she got a double whammy from what was a ULEZ security guard.
And now, what speed? I mean, I assume it wasn't like I'm not that I'm. No,
it's not 70 miles an hour, but obviously, and I think the first one would have been below 10 miles an hour. But even so, ramming into someone, even at a small speed, when they're not expecting it, they're in front of you, she's an old person, she's not very mobile, and they got her. And then as she tried to get out of the way, they got her again. So, as you can imagine, she's been in a lot of agony for a long time. And, the least that Khan could do these days is actually to apologise to her, because ultimately he's the man at the top of TfL as the organisation. He's the chairman. He should publicly apologise instead of jetting off to New York.
Wow. So what's happened then with the I'm just looking at here. UFL security contractor found guilty of careless driving.
Yeah, bear in mind this would have been about, I think it was around about November last year. The 12th of November was when the original incident was. So you might have some stills from that. You can see some of the bruising and things that Heather suffered. But what you won't see, you might not easily find it, is the video. But it was put online at the time. But I can get that sent to you later. I don't have it to hand at the moment.
Yeah, because I only heard about it literally last night, as in the verdict, and then I was just trying to find. I was trying to find news articles about it. I just couldn't find. But I just couldn't find any.
Well, interestingly, at the time, it was picked up by ITV, it was picked up by GB News, and I think it was picked up by Talk TV at the time, because obviously it was at the height of the ULEZ coming in and all the rest of it. So the media. The mainstream media was still interested in it to some extent, but they weren't interested in the follow-up, which is a bit disgraceful, really. Having reported on it in the first place, you'd have thought they'd report on the follow-up.
So, obviously, this has been going on. How long has the ULEZ expansion occurred? What was it, last summer? Not this summer, just gone, but the one before.
Basically, the end of October, the end of August, the beginning of September, in last year, 2023. So it's been going just over a year now.
Okay. So, obviously, I do obviously notice that you've been at these at these protests, etc. What is actually, in your opinion, what is the solution to this? Because from what I've been seeing, I'm not trying to upset people. I'm not trying to cause demoralization or anything, but to me, especially as a person who's very much against the ULEZ, because I don't think that, I personally think this isn't really about environmental issues. I don't think it even warrants that. I think ultimately this is just about controlling the populace. I think it's about taking away your motors. I think it's about that the state doesn't like that you can just hop into a car and go anywhere in the country that you want. I think there's very much the whole civil servants, etc., all of the state kind of personnel, they're basically just giant control freaks. They just want to control every aspect of your life.
That's exactly right. If I can just interject, cars represent freedom. Simple as that. Yes. They represent personal freedom to go to where you want, when you want, and be yourself. You don't have to rely on anybody else. You don't have to rely on the state. And of course, there are many people who actually expect, the individual to rely on the state. They want you dependent on the state. They want you to be a slave to the state almost. And so it's modern day slavery, actually. In fact, someone should take them to court under the Modern Day Slavery Act, because that's effectively what it is, trying to make the state the master and, the individuals all the slaves. So, and that one might sound a bit radical, but that's how it feels, because the freedoms are taken away bit by bit by bit. And to that extent, I agree with you. It is what's the solution ultimately? Unless, and I've never advocated this, because I think, people rioting and doing all those sort of things, unless you get, unless you're going to get 10 million people coming out onto the streets to demonstrate, which is more than the Labour Party got votes, then, nothing's going to happen. And even then, it would have to be peaceful, because otherwise what you see in riots and all the other things is people get hurt, businesses get hurt. And that's definitely not the right way to go about changing things. I've always believed in democratic change, but it's not necessarily even about the party sometimes. It's about the individual and what that individual stands for, even within the party political system. And if you can get the right people elected, then you get the right result. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know if you probably heard. So I saw you were in the waiting room. I'm not a big. I personally don't think. Obviously, you will have a different opinion this as being an elected councillor, but I generally don't think that really you can vote your way out of this. I think that personally you do have to take a direct action, and that direct action to me is just simply you don't pay the ULEZ. Like,
well,
there's some people, and I doubt that you're one of them, who think that cutting down cameras is the way, and causing criminal damage, etc., is the way to go. I think that's basically counterproductive. I think that it's actually making things worse.
Well, I certainly never supported that course of action, because actually, ultimately, we as taxpayers pay for that equipment, and vandalising. It's a bit like vandalising your own television or something. You wouldn't do it. It just doesn't make sense. However, I do understand the frustration of people, particularly when they see that the cameras are destroying their livelihoods, the cameras are destroying their freedoms. I get that, but I still think they're wrong to do it. In terms of direct action or not paying, well, funny enough, there's about, I can't remember what it is, it's over £250 million of unpaid ULEZ penalties.
Yes.
£250 million. So that says something in itself. Now, some of that, there's always a lag, so that a fine is issued today, and 28 days pass and not everybody's paid it, but in 28 days some of it will be paid, etc., etc. So you've got to be careful on the facts and figures, but it's a lot of money. £250 million, £250 million that is not paid. So I think that there's an element of that, and what you've got to remember is anywhere between 10 and 20% of that is down to foreign registered vehicles, that is cars that are not registered in this country, that can get away with it, because you can't chase them ultimately. You can send a penalty off to Belgium or France or wherever, but frankly, it's not going to get paid, is it? And what you're going to do?
I actually do know. I actually can confirm that, because I went to Canada and I rented out a vehicle, and I got the equivalent of a PCN, whatever it was. And they were asking me for money, and I just laughed and threw it in the bin. There's nothing they can do about it once you're back in your natural
absolutely.
country.
I mean, I suppose if you come over again, they can. But by the time you come over again, you might have a different car, different registration, and it all starts again. So it's bonkers, and the whole thing is bonkers. If you've got a classic car, a massive gas guzzling classic car, then you're entitled to go and drive that as much as you like. And there are people I know that, because they've got to pay their £12.50, whereas before they would have just done a short journey and it wouldn't have been very polluting. Now they try and do everything in that £12.50 day. So they zoom around doing lots and lots and lots of stuff. And it's so counterproductive.
Yeah, I hear rumour that's all right. I hear rumour that it's going to increase as well. Because obviously I've been out of the ULEZ loop for a little bit. I used to be more active in the ULEZ stuff, but I've just fallen away from it. What's the update with this pay per mile and increasing of the ULEZ payment? Has there been any?
Well, there's nothing to stop him actually. Well, there's nothing to stop him increasing the charges. Oh, I haven't made enough money. Oh, my budget gap is worse, so I'm going to increase the charge from £12.50 to £15. That will be coming at some stage, because he won't be making enough money. Then we're going to get extra cameras. Why is he still putting up all these extra cameras? There's only one answer to that: pay per mile, and that really is a breach of people's freedoms. It's monitoring everywhere you go. Forget the charges, but way back I did a calculation. The average car does about, I can't remember what it was, 2 miles a day that's driving in London. The average car, this is the car, does 2 miles a day or something. That's the average. Because people in outer London do far greater mileage. And so to get that it works out at roughly £2 per mile. £2 per mile. And imagine you're doing 10 miles, 20 quid. You know, I mean, it's just mad.